used to think pain was something temporary, a strained muscle here, a stiff neck there, but over time, it stopped leaving. It settled deep inside me, like a second spine made of tension and weight. Every morning, I woke up feeling older than the day before, my joints cracking like dry branches, my back protesting even the act of standing. I'd grown used to the dull ache that wrapped around my lower back and the pressure that never left the base of my neck. It became background noise, something I worked around, something I ignored, until it forced me to acknowledge it. At 50, I thought I had made peace with discomfort. I thought it was part of the bargain. Age, independence, solitude. I lived alone in a house that once held a family. The silence was no longer strange to me. It was a kind of rhythm I had learned to move within. But my body, it seemed, had grown tired of holding it all together. Even simple tasks left me breathless, sore, drained. The stairs became harder. Lifting a box from the closet felt like hauling stone. I started sleeping with pillows propped in strange positions, trying to trick my spine into temporary comfort. But nothing helped. The pain persisted, stubborn and familiar. It was a Tuesday when I saw the flyer. I had gone to the grocery store to pick up bread and oranges, and as I passed the community bulletin board by the entrance, a small square of paper caught my eye. Simple design, no photo, just black text on white paper. In-home massage therapy, trained, respectful, personalized care. Something about it lingered with me. I didn't take the number right away. I walked past it, even rolled my eyes at the idea. But that night, after struggling to sleep through the throb in my shoulder, I found myself thinking about it again. By morning, I was moving slower than usual, one hand pressed to my lower back as I shuffled to the kitchen. The pain had become a wall I lived behind, and for the first time, I didn't want to stay behind it anymore. I found the crumpled receipt I had shoved in my pocket the day before, scribbled the number on the back, and left it on the table. Still, I waited 3 more days before calling. I told myself it wasn't urgent, that I could stretch, use the heating pad, manage it on my own. But deep down, I knew I was just afraid. Afraid of inviting someone new into my quiet life. Afraid of what that might stir. The voice that answered was younger than I expected, calm, measured. She asked a few questions, gave me a list of available times, and we settled on a date, Thursday, late afternoon. I hung up feeling a strange mix of nervousness and relief. I cleaned the house the day before, not out of necessity, but out of some need to be prepared. I dusted places no one ever looked, changed the sheets in the guest room, even lit a candle in the living room. It felt like preparing for something more than a massage, like preparing for disruption, or maybe for something I hadn't yet allowed myself to name. The pain didn't ease in the days leading up to the appointment. In fact, it seemed to grow heavier, almost as if my body knew change was coming and tensed in resistance. But beneath the stiffness, beneath the ache, there was a quiet thread of anticipation. I told myself it was foolish. It was just a service, a transaction, a body helping another body find relief. But still, that Thursday, as the clock ticked toward 4, I felt something shift inside me. Not in my bones, not in my muscles, deeper. Something I hadn't felt in a very long time. The doorbell rang precisely at 4. I had been sitting on the edge of the couch for 10 minutes already, pretending to read the same paragraph over and over, my back impossibly straight, hands clasped too tightly in my lap. When I opened the door, the sight of her startled me more than I had expected. She was young, younger than I had imagined. Her features were fresh, smooth skin, bright eyes, hair pulled up in a loose bun, and a calm that seemed almost out of place in someone so youthful. She wore soft leggings, a fitted zip-up jacket, and carried a compact bag slung over her shoulder. There was something efficient about her, like she had done this 100 times. I, on the other hand, had done this never. She stepped inside, her presence neither loud nor shy, just present. She looked around briefly, taking in the space like someone reading the edges of a room rather than the furniture inside it. I gestured toward the bedroom, the only space that seemed remotely appropriate for what was about to happen, and she followed me without hesitation. I had already prepared it, the curtains drawn halfway to soften the light, the white quilt laid over the bed, 2 pillows stacked near the headboard, a towel folded neatly on the side. The air smelled faintly of the lavender candle I had burned earlier, trying to create a sense of calm I wasn't entirely sure I felt. She asked a few things about areas of tension, any injuries, how much pressure I preferred. I answered in nods, short phrases, trying to keep my voice from sounding too uncertain. Then she stepped out for a moment while I undressed. Standing there in my underwear, I felt a strange mixture of vulnerability and detachment, like I had stepped outside myself and was watching from the corner of the room. I lay face down on the bed, pulling the towel over my lower body, and waited. When she returned, I only saw her feet at first, bare, graceful, quiet against the floor. She moved with a kind of confidence that doesn't ask for attention. There was the soft clink of a bottle, the faint floral scent of oil opening into the air, and then the first touch. Her hands landed lightly on my shoulders, warm and dry, just resting for a moment before they began to move. I hadn't realized how tense I was until that moment. The muscles in my back were like thick ropes, wound tight and stiff. But she found them quickly, pressing and gliding, using firm, sure strokes that radiated heat into my skin. My breath, which had been shallow and erratic, began to even out. Her hands moved methodically, inch by inch, reading my body like it was a map she already knew. Shoulders, upper back, arms, each movement sinking a little deeper, coaxing the pain outward. She didn't speak. I didn't either. The silence was full, like a shared agreement that words would only interrupt the rhythm. My body began to surrender under her hands, the usual stiffness giving way to something unfamiliar, release. When she reached the center of my back, her thumbs dug gently into the muscles that had been screaming for attention for years. I felt something loosen inside me, not just physically, but somewhere deeper, in that place where weariness lives. She moved down my spine, her hand tracing along the muscles with care, circling, kneading, pressing with precision. At one point, when her hands reached the small of my back, I felt an involuntary shiver rise through me, not from cold, from recognition. Her palms paused briefly, then continued, as if nothing had happened, but my skin remembered. She worked on my legs next, covering and uncovering with professional ease. Her thumbs traced the outer line of my thighs. Her palms glided over the tense muscles in my calves. Her touch was firm, practiced, but there was something undeniably human in it too. Not mechanical, not distant. It was presence, a kind of gentle authority that made me feel seen without ever being looked at. By the time she finished, I could barely move, not from pain, but from the kind of stillness that follows surrender. My body felt like liquid, like everything inside me had been poured out and reassembled softer. She stepped away, her voice quiet, signaling that the session was over. I heard the sound of her cleaning, packing, moving through the room like a breeze through a half-open window. I stayed on the bed for a while, unmoving, eyes closed, breathing in the lingering warmth on my skin. After she left, I sat in the dim bedroom, still wrapped in the towel. The air had changed. I had changed. The pain was not gone, not completely, but it was no longer mine alone. Something had shifted, something I couldn't yet name. All I knew was that I would call her again, Not because I wanted another massage, but because for the first time in years, I had been touched in a way that reached beneath the surface, and it had awakened something I wasn't sure I was ready for, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. The second session came a week later, but it felt much sooner. The days in between had passed in a strange haze, each one colored by the memory of her hands on my skin. I tried to go about my usual routine, grocery runs, morning stretches, evening tea, but there was a quiet thread of tension woven into everything. Not the kind of tension I was used to, not the aching knot in my shoulder or the pressure at the base of my spine. This was different. This lived deeper, in the spaces between thought and sensation, a flutter under the surface, a pull I didn't want to name. When she arrived again, I noticed things I hadn't noticed the first time. The way her fingers adjusted the strap of her bag as she stepped inside. The soft indentation at the base of her throat where her collar dipped. The way she looked at the room, not just as a workspace, but like she remembered it, remembered me. Her presence didn't just fill the space, it warmed it. And I felt myself softening in response, not out of politeness, but out of something I couldn't quite control. I led her back to the bedroom. The routine unfolded the same way, but the air felt heavier, charged. As I lay down and settled into the familiar position, towel draped over my lower body, I realized I was already anticipating her touch. Not just for relief, not just to soothe my pain, but because I craved the feeling of being handled with intention. My skin seemed to remember her before she even touched me. This time, the massage began slower. Her hands lingered longer, her pressure more deliberate, her pace more fluid. I felt every movement more intensely. When her palms spread over my shoulders, my breath caught in my throat. Not from discomfort, but from the strange thrill of it. I tried to remind myself that this was normal, this was her job. But logic didn't reach my skin. My body told a different story, one of attention, one of memory, one of need. She worked lower down my back, and the tips of her fingers brushed just beneath the towel. The contact was brief, almost dismissible, but it was there, a flicker, a signal. My body tightened, not in pain, but in anticipation. I held still, heart knocking softly against my ribs. She didn't pull away in surprise. She didn't rush to correct. Instead, her hands simply moved on, as if nothing had happened. And yet, everything had. As the session continued, these moments accumulated like tiny fractures in glass, barely visible, but growing. Her hand would pause slightly too long at my hip. Her breath would brush against the side of my arm as she leaned closer. I became hyper-aware of her presence, of every movement, every shift in weight, every exhale that echoed just a little louder in the silence. The room had not changed, but the dynamic between us had. It hummed now, low and constant, just beneath the surface. Afterward, I found it difficult to speak. I wrapped myself in my robe and sat on the edge of the bed, watching the folds of the towel she had carefully refolded. She moved through the room with the same calm precision, but I could feel the difference. It wasn't what she did, it was how I received it. My senses stayed heightened, my body humming with something that wasn't quite arousal, but wasn't far from it either. I tried to push the thought away, to file it under imagination, loneliness, projection, but it clung to me. When she left, I stood in the doorway a little longer than necessary. I watched her walk toward her car, the shape of her back, the slope of her shoulders, the way her hand brushed her hair behind her ear. Then the door closed, and I was alone again. But the room still felt full. The bed still felt warm. And my thoughts refused to return to where they had been before. There was no line crossed yet, nothing said, nothing obvious, but something had cracked. a fine, invisible fracture in the boundary I had once believed was solid. I didn't know what it meant. I only knew I couldn't unfeel it, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. The fourth session didn't begin differently, but I felt different. From the moment she stepped into the house, I could sense something had shifted, not in her manner, which remained calm and professional, but in the air between us. It was thicker somehow, full of things unsaid but felt. My skin reacted before she even touched me, humming with anticipation, alert to every movement she made as she prepared. I laid down on the bed as I had before, the towel draped across my hips, the familiar weight of silence settling over us. When her hands found my back, I closed my eyes and let my body soften into the mattress. Her touch was slow, deliberate, tracing lines that felt more personal than technical. Each pass of her hands over my skin felt like a question I didn't know how to answer. She moved lower, her palms pressing gently over the muscles of my waist and lower back. The pressure shifted subtly, her fingers exploring the edges of my body in a way that felt careful but intentional. Her hands hovered near the hem of the towel, then moved beneath it, just slightly, just enough for my breath to catch. There was no rush. She seemed to be listening to my body more than guiding it, and in that stillness, I felt myself open in ways I didn't expect. Her fingers moved with reverence, not searching for tension now, but offering something else entirely: connection, attention, perhaps even longing. The space where her touch lingered was no longer about pain or healing or habit. It was about presence, and I was fully present. Every inch of my skin seemed to pulse beneath her fingertips. My body reacted before my mind caught up. Heat bloomed low in my belly, slow and deep. My chest rose and fell with quiet urgency. The sensation wasn't sharp or sudden. It was a build, a layering of years of unmet tenderness, of silence broken not by words but by touch. I felt held, claimed, seen. I didn't tense. I didn't flinch. I let her explore because something in me had already given permission long before this moment arrived. When her hand paused lower, cupping the curve of my body with quiet care, I trembled. Not in fear, but in the kind of vulnerability that comes only with complete surrender. I wasn't thinking about age or roles or reason. I was thinking only of how she made me feel, like I was still whole, still worthy of being touched with wonder. The intimacy wasn't loud. It was sacred, slow, a language of skin and silence. She didn't push or assume. Her movements were intuitive, sensing what I needed even before I knew it myself. And as her fingers moved gently, deeper into the space where I had been untouched for so long, I felt something unravel inside me, a release that wasn't physical alone. It was memory. It was longing. It was the quiet ache of being held exactly where I had once learned to hide. My breath shuddered through me, and I let the feeling take me, not chasing it, not resisting it, just being inside it completely. Her touch steadied me, grounded me, and in that moment, I felt more alive, more real than I had in years. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The language between us had changed, and I knew whatever came next, we had crossed into something neither of us would be able to undo. Something had shifted between us so clearly that pretending otherwise felt impossible. When she returned for the next session, there was no longer that quiet distance, no veil of formal professionalism. Instead, there was softness, a kind of understanding in the way she entered the room, in the way she looked at me. I had cleaned the space more carefully than usual, changed the sheets, lit a softer candle. not out of expectation, but in quiet reverence for what I already knew would happen. Whatever it was, it would not be like before. I undressed slowly, deliberately, folding my clothes with care and placing them on the chair. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. There was anticipation in my fingers, in my breath, in the hush that filled the room. When I lay down, the sheet draped gently over my hips. I wasn't just preparing for relief. I was opening a door. Her hands began, as before, finding familiar patterns across my back. But there was a new slowness to her movements. She wasn't rushing toward any destination. She was lingering, exploring. Her palms were warmer than usual, as if she'd been holding her breath before placing them on me. Each stroke pulled something from beneath my skin, memories maybe, or buried want. When she reached my shoulders, she leaned in closer, and I could feel her breath, warm and steady, brushing the top of my spine. And then I felt the press of her lips, not intrusive, not even assertive, just a soft kiss between my shoulder blades, the kind that landed like a secret. My skin reacted instantly, not in shock, but in recognition, as if it had been waiting for that exact moment, for that contact, for that heat. Her mouth followed the trail her hands had started, her lips brushing slowly down my back, grazing lightly across my spine, each kiss blooming warmth that settled into me like a weightless echo. Her touch was no longer clinical, no longer meant to fix or soothe. It was meant to honor, to reveal. I felt her hands part the towel a little lower this time, her fingers skimming the top of my hips with deliberate gentleness. She kissed the curve there, and I trembled again, a full body response that I couldn't contain. My breath caught in my throat, but I didn't stop her. I didn't shift away. I wanted this, all of it. As she continued, her hands moved slowly down the backs of my thighs, her lips following in delicate, reverent contact. My skin grew warmer, flushed with awareness, not just of what she was doing, but of how fully I was allowing it. I wasn't retreating into my thoughts the way I once would have. I was in my body entirely, present with every inch of sensation, every soft press of her mouth, every glide of her fingers across skin that no longer felt dormant. At one point, her hands curled under my hips, lifting me slightly, not forcefully, but with intention. I let her guide me. The towel slipped further, forgotten. I could feel my own skin grow dewy with heat, a delicate layer of moisture rising to meet her. It wasn't embarrassment. It wasn't shame. It was my body answering hers in quiet honesty. Her kisses reached the small of my back, slow and unhurried, and my body arched gently beneath her. The air between us felt thick now, dense with everything we'd left unspoken. I felt her pause, her breath shallow, before she continued again, her lips lower, softer, paired with the glide of her hands that moved in slow, worshipful patterns. I could feel the warmth of her skin against mine, the subtle shift of her weight on the bed as she leaned into me with both intention and care. We didn't speak, and yet everything was said. My body was open beneath her, but more than that, my guard was gone. And in the hum of her movements, the way her touch grew more fluid, the way my skin responded with its own rhythm, there was nothing else. No past, no fear, no wondering what this meant. Only now. By the time she pulled the sheet back up over my hips, my skin was damp with sweat and warmth, my breath slow and deep, as if I'd been carried through something I didn't even know I needed. Her hands lingered on my shoulders for a moment more, her thumbs pressing lightly into the muscles there, like a final, silent acknowledgement. When she left the room for me to dress, I stayed where I was, unmoving, my limbs heavy, my heart quiet. I stared at the ceiling, the dim light catching the edge of the curtain, and for the first time in years, I felt like something in me had been touched far beyond the physical. I wasn't sure what to call it. I only knew I would never forget the feeling. The days that followed moved with a strange kind of softness, like the air had thickened slightly, cushioning every motion, every thought. The house felt quieter, but not empty. It felt inhabited by something invisible yet alive, an imprint left on the space, on my skin, on the rhythm of my day. I moved slower without realizing it, as though some part of me had slipped into a different current, one that didn't rush or demand or resist. Everything had changed, and yet nothing had. The dishes still waited in the sink, the mail still came, the sun still reached through the same cracks in the blinds every morning, but I was different. The change wasn't loud or sudden. It settled into me like warmth after a long, biting chill. I caught myself smiling at nothing, pausing in doorways, noticing things I had ignored for years. The way my robe felt against my bare arms, the way my feet sounded on the floorboards, the scent of her oil still lingering faintly in the fabric of my bedsheets. She came again and again after that, not always on a fixed schedule, not with the predictability of a service, but with the quiet certainty of someone returning to a place that welcomes them. Each visit was calm, unspoken, charged with a closeness that didn't require naming. She brought with her not just her hands, not just her warmth, but a kind of presence that filled the room before she even spoke. Sometimes we would begin with the usual process, the preparations, the setup, but it no longer felt procedural. It felt intimate, familiar, like slipping into something known, something mine. Her touch had evolved. It wasn't just skilled anymore. It was responsive, fluid, searching in the most tender way. There was no longer a clear line between where the massage ended and where something else began. Her fingers seemed to know where to press, where to linger, where to hold, and I welcomed it without hesitation. My body had stopped flinching at its own need. It no longer resisted the waves of warmth that moved through me when her hands traced the line of my spine or when her breath grazed the curve of my neck. I surrendered again and again, not just to her, but to myself. What surprised me most was the stillness I carried afterward. There had always been a restlessness in me, something that hummed beneath the surface, waiting, questioning, aching. But now that hum was quiet, not silenced, not denied, just held. I had space within me that hadn't been there before, a sense of internal quiet that made everyday motions feel sacred. Brushing my hair, folding towels, pouring tea. Everything became a kind of ritual, grounded in a new awareness of my body and what it had remembered. I stopped hiding from the mirror. I let the light in without closing the curtains. I started touching my own skin with the same gentleness I had once reserved only for memory. There were days I caught myself humming, hands moving slowly across my chest or belly as I dressed, marveling at how much sensation there still was, how alive I still was. My body no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a place of return. At night, I found it harder to sleep, but not because of restlessness. It was because I wanted to stay awake in the feeling. I would lie in bed, covers loose, fingers resting gently on my side, and remember the way she had held me without gripping, kissed me without claiming. I'd feel the echo of her touch ripple quietly through me like a tide retreating slowly across wet sand. And in those hours, my thoughts were not filled with fear or guilt. They were filled with light, with breath, with the sense that I had come back into myself. We didn't speak of love, and we didn't define it, but it was there, in the way she looked at me when I opened the door, in the way her hands slowed when they found the center of my chest, in the way our silences stretched between us, not as voids, but as threads. I never asked her what it meant. I didn't need to. What mattered was how I felt when she touched me, whole, heard, held. There was a rhythm to it all now, a balance between solitude and contact, between motion and rest. I would go days without seeing her, and I would still feel her in the way I moved through the house, in the way I stood a little taller when I walked past a mirror, in the way I breathed more fully. She had awakened something in me that wasn't only physical. It was something quiet and enduring, something I didn't know I could still possess. Desire, yes, but also peace. Not the peace of silence or surrender, but the kind that comes when you are finally seen exactly as you are, and nothing in you is rejected. She changed nothing in my life and everything at once. I still lived alone. I still washed the same dishes. I still folded the same towels. But now I did it in a body that felt less forgotten, a body that had been met and remembered. I didn't look for labels or futures. I lived in the present tense, in breath, in touch, in the soft weight of her absence and the even softer grace of her return. And in that balance, in that quiet movement between her hands and my skin, between her gaze and my own reflection, I found something I hadn't known I was missing. I found myself, whole, moving, alive.